let's talk intuitively about what a prompt is doing and how the patterns in the prompt sort of tap into the capabilities of a large language model. I think looking at some examples will help to give you a sense of how your prompts are really affecting and eliciting different behaviors from the underlying large language model that you're interacting with. So let's take a look at this example. I want to start off by talking about pattern. Pattern's really important. Remember, as we talked about, large language models are trained to basically predict the next word. They're constantly trying to predict the next word based on what came before. So you give it a sentence, and it's trying to predict the next word. And then it's taking that and adding it and trying to predict the next word, and over and over and over. And so it was trained on large pieces of the internet trying to predict the next sentence. So one of the things that it's learning to do is to recognize patterns that tell it what the next word should be. That's basically what it's doing. Now, this is a really simple example of this concept. I'm going to tell ChatGPT, complete this story, and I start with, Mary had a little, and I stop. Now, if you know the nursery rhyme, it's Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, and you can imagine that this story showed up over and over and over and over in the data that ChatGPT was trained on. So when I say, Mary had a little, that is a very powerful pattern that ChatGPT has seen many, many, many times, and so it immediately tries to pick up with lamb, its fleece is white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. So that pattern was seen so many times that ChatGPT, when I put in the first part of it, it immediately responds with the next part of the sentence. It knows where to pick up. So one thing we have to think about is, if we know the right patterns, if we can tap into things that the model has been trained on and seen over and over and over again, we'll be more likely to not only get a consistent response, so we're going to consistently get a particular completion of Mary had a little because it's been seen so many times in the training data. We get more consistency, but we're also going to more likely get a particular sort of ability to tap into it, to unlock it. Like if we want a particular behavior, we want to have the right pattern that we're tapping into. Now, let's look at what happens if we change the pattern a bit. And so I say, rather than, Mary had a little, I say, complete this story. A girl named Mary had a microscopic. Now, this isn't the pattern that it was trained on anymore, right? And it says, a girl named Mary had a microscopic friend named Max. Max was so small, you could only see him through a microscope. Despite his size, he had a big personality and was always eager to go on adventures with Mary. One day, Mary decided to take Max on a trip to the local pond. She carefully placed him on a lily pad. Now, one of the interesting things is you can imagine that when you start talking about microscopic, that, you can think about, there's probably descriptions of going to a pond and doing, science with a class of students. I almost have a vision of it reading stories about, students getting samples of pond water and looking at them under a microscope. But the important thing is you notice that Mary had a little, created a very, very specific response, whereas a girl named Mary had a microscopic, creates a much different response. And then if we go and rerun this, we get something completely different. Pet named Max. Max was a tiny creature that lived in a small jar. And so, this pattern is strong. There are words in this pattern that are strong and sort of give context that help to shape the story. But the pattern itself is not as strong as Mary had a little. So, doing it again, whereas the other story changed completely, I'm still getting the same completion with this. I'm still getting lamb, its fleece was as white as snow. So every time I'm getting a very consistent, response to this pattern. So one of the things to think about when you're writing a pattern or writing a prompt is, what patterns do I have in my prompt? And what patterns will that probably tap into that the large language model was trained on? So if there's a very strong pattern in the prompt, you're more likely to get a response to that pattern. On the other hand, if that's not a pattern that it was trained on, it's not as clear, then you're going to have other things that are going to matter, like specific words. So a microscopic is going to fundamentally, that word is fundamentally going to change the behavior of this prompt because it's such a strong word. A girl named Mary is sort of generic. There were probably lots of stories with a girl named Mary, but microscopic, it has all of this feeling and implications to it, and that's going to then influence the large language model's output. Specific words alone, because of the patterns around those words, like microscopic is always going to be talked about in the context of small things probably, or maybe in terms of things like in this case, like a small creature that lived in a glass jar. That word itself has a strong sort of pattern of other words that are coming around it, but it's not as strong as the pattern Mary had a little.